What happens to Alicent Hightower at the end of House of the Dragon? After everything Alicent has gone through, her story is heading toward one of the most tragic endings in the entire Dance of the Dragons. She begins the story as Rhaenyra Targaryen's closest friend. She becomes Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. She becomes the mother of Aegon, Aemond, Helaena, and Daeron. She becomes the center of the Green faction. And eventually, she loses almost everything. By the end of the story, Alicent isn't a powerful queen anymore. She isn't even really a political player. She becomes a prisoner, a grieving mother, and a woman forced to live with the consequences of the war she helped create. And if House of the Dragon follows the broad direction of Fire and Blood, Alicent's final fate is surprisingly quiet compared with the enormous political conflict surrounding her. But before we get there, we need to understand what happens to her after Season 3. Major book spoilers ahead. Season 3 has already pushed Alicent into a completely different position. Her relationship with Rhaenyra has changed dramatically. For years, Alicent believed that she was protecting her children from Rhaenyra. She believed that Aegon needed the throne because Rhaenyra's ascension could eventually put her children in danger. But by Season 3, Alicent has seen the consequences of that decision. Her family is falling apart. Aegon has been horribly injured. Aemond has become increasingly dangerous. Helaena is devastated by everything that has happened. And Alicent herself has lost almost all of her influence. The woman who once helped shape the Green faction is now watching the world she built collapse around her. And that is what makes her final story so tragic. Alicent eventually realizes something that she probably should have understood much earlier. There is no real victory for her side. Even if Aegon wins, her family has already been destroyed by the war. Even if Rhaenyra loses, Alicent's children have suffered enormously. And the Targaryen dynasty itself is being torn apart. That's why Alicent eventually tries to find a way out. Her meeting with Rhaenyra becomes one of the most important moments in her entire story. Alicent essentially offers Rhaenyra a path to King's Landing. She is willing to help her former friend take the city. But Rhaenyra makes one thing very clear. Aegon has to die. And Alicent cannot accept that. This is the central contradiction in Alicent's character. She wants the war to end. She wants peace. She wants to save her remaining children. But she cannot completely escape the political consequences of the decision she made. And eventually, King's Landing falls anyway. Rhaenyra takes the capital. Alicent becomes a prisoner. In the book, this is one of the biggest reversals in her entire life. She goes from being the woman who effectively controlled the Red Keep to being confined inside it. She loses political power. She loses her ability to influence the king. And she is forced to watch the Targaryen succession continue without her. But there is something especially heartbreaking about Alicent's imprisonment. She survives. That might sound like a good thing. But for Alicent, survival becomes its own punishment. Almost everyone she fought for is eventually gone. Her sons die, her daughter dies, her father dies, her political allies disappear. And the Green cause she spent years defending ultimately collapses. In Fire and Blood, Alicent remains alive after the dance. She survives long enough to see Aegon II die and her grandson Aegon III become king. But she has no meaningful political power anymore. She is essentially confined within the Red Keep. Her life becomes increasingly isolated. And this is where the story takes a very different direction from what you might expect. Alicent doesn't get some huge final confrontation with Rhaenyra. She doesn't reclaim the throne. She doesn't lead another army. She simply watches. And that is arguably much crueler. Because Alicent has spent her entire adult life trying to control the future of her family. She wanted Aegon to be king. She wanted her children protected. She wanted the Hightowers to remain powerful. She wanted to prevent Rhaenyra from taking the throne. But eventually, almost all of those ambitions disappear. Her children are dead or gone. The Hightowers have lost their political dominance. And the throne belongs to the next generation. Aegon III becomes king. And the strange thing is that Aegon III is Rhaenyra's son. The boy Alicent's faction once viewed as a potential enemy is now sitting on the Iron Throne. That is the ultimate irony. Alicent spent years fighting to prevent Rhaenyra's line from ruling. But after the dance, Rhaenyra's bloodline ultimately survives through Aegon III. The war therefore accomplishes almost nothing that Alicent originally wanted. The Targaryens are still on the throne, but the family has been devastated, and Alicent is left to witness it. There is another important part of her ending. Alicent becomes increasingly mentally and emotionally broken. In the book, she is confined to her apartments in Maegor's Holdfast. She has guards watching her. Her only regular company includes a septa and servants. She is given books and sewing materials, but she spends much of her time grieving. According to the historical account in Fire and Blood, she eventually begins talking to herself and develops an intense hatred of the color green. And that detail is incredibly symbolic. Green was the color of her faction. It represented her family, her political identity, her struggle against Rhaenyra. But by the end, even the color itself becomes something she cannot bear. The Green Queen has effectively rejected the very identity that defined her. And then comes the final tragedy. Alicent dies during the winter fever epidemic in King's Landing. She becomes one of the victims of the disease in 133 AC. The book describes her becoming delirious during her final illness, before briefly regaining some clarity. She speaks about wanting to see her children again, and she hopes to see her dead grandson, Jaehaerys. But there is one haunting detail. She does not speak about Viserys. The man whose remarriage set this entire chain of events in motion is strangely absent from her final thoughts. Alicent dies during the night, at what the book describes as the Hour of the Wolf. Her death is considered by some to be a mercy because of the terrible mental and emotional state she had reached. But will House of the Dragon follow this ending exactly? That's where things get interesting. Her children, her grandchildren, her former friend, her political allies, and ultimately the world she spent decades trying to control. That's why Alicent's ending isn't really about death. It's about survival after losing everything. And that is what separates her from many of the other major characters. Rhaenyra dies, Aegon dies, Aemon dies, Daemon dies, Helaena dies. But Alicent remains. She is forced to live with the consequences. And perhaps that is the most appropriate ending for her. Alicent's entire life has been about duty. Her father tells her what to do. The king expects things from her. Her children need her. The Greens expect her loyalty. The realm expects her to behave like a queen. And by the end, there is almost nothing left. No throne, no political mission, no family to protect. Just Alicent. That's why her final fate could be one of the most heartbreaking stories in Season 4. She doesn't get the heroic ending that some viewers might expect. She doesn't die defending her family. She doesn't become queen again. She doesn't defeat Rhaenyra. Instead, she lives long enough to realize that the war destroyed almost everything she was trying to protect. And that brings us to the biggest question. Does Alicent ever reconcile with Rhaenyra? The television series has made their relationship much more complicated than the book's historical account. Their friendship has remained at the emotional center of the story. Even after years of conflict, Alicent still sees something of the girl she once knew in Rhaenyra. And Rhaenyra, despite everything Alicent has done, still has complicated feelings toward her. That means the show has an opportunity to give Alicent a more personal ending. But whatever happens between them, the larger tragedy remains. Alicent cannot undo the Green Council. She cannot undo Aegon's coronation. She cannot undo the war. She cannot bring her children back. And she cannot restore the friendship she had with Rhaenyra when they were young. All she can do is survive. And eventually, even that ends. So what happens to Alicent Hightower? In Fire and Blood, she survives the Dance of the Dragons. She is imprisoned after the political collapse of the Greens. She watches Aegon II die and Aegon III take the throne. She loses almost everyone she loves. She becomes increasingly isolated and mentally distressed. And eventually, she dies from winter fever in King's Landing. Her ending is not glorious. It's tragic. And in many ways, it's the perfect ending for a character whose entire life was shaped by a war she believed she could prevent. Alicent wanted to protect her children. She wanted to secure Aegon's future. She wanted to preserve her family's power. But the struggle for the Iron Throne ultimately destroys the very family she was trying to save. And when the war finally ends, Alicent is still there, watching, remembering, grieving, until finally, the last surviving witness to the Green cause disappears too. The queen who helped start the dance doesn't die on the battlefield. She lives long enough to see what the dance truly cost. And that may be the most tragic fate of all.